having tech issues.
Yeah, we don't have anybody watching us yet.
He's like, yeah, because we just turned the live on. Okay.
Actually, do you have a feed I can let people know we're on? Where should people?
Yeah, no. If they go to my YouTube channel,
I think I can get you a link to
the MasterHook channel.
That would be awesome. Because if I could just post it around to all of the things, then all of the people can know the things.
Yes, definitely. Give me 1 second. And hi, people. Give us a second here.
It's live. It's live, right?
You can hear Lee. Are we gonna get
here,
his feed?
let me
Sorry,
see
we're
if
still
I
doing
can...
the tech here, so thanks everybody. Hang on a second. It's like, Lee's here, you just can't see him. Okay, hold on. Sorry, all the things.
Okay, I think that's as loud as I can get it.
Blame Alaska.
No, it's fine. It's just, it's like I'm literally looking at 3 different versions of myself right now.
And he's not into that.
No,
so.
I'm not. I'm like, oh, I need 50 different versions of myself to make myself. No.
Oh my god, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
That may be one of my kinks, but it's not one of his. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, no, the easiest is to get to my page, just youtube.com/MasterHook.
I'm sending you right now his channel.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Okay,
I've basically gotten to a point where YouTube has said, yeah, you can do pretty much everything. You know, I've been around for 10 years, 10 plus years on there, and I think that I've gotten enough people watching my videos to justify them saying, sure, do that.
Okay, so we sent you the link.
Came across as internal server error. Let's try it again.
Who? Thanks everybody on the live with your patience. We'll be a second.
Yeah, there's nobody right now.
Oh, really? Okay, I was like,
I'm honestly, I'm not expecting a ton of people on the live. It's more of a, if somebody has something they want to throw out at us that we're not thinking about.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to share this one.
No, it worked.
Oh, it worked. Okay. If you want to tweet it, do whatever you want to do. Okay. So master whenever everything's all.
Hey, to the 2 people who are on right now, can you say hi?
I was like, Lee's doing his thing.
Yeah.
We're trying to get everything all set up here.
I don't wonder why the YouTube is...
Maybe it's not set up. Oh, hello.
Oh, okay.
Bubbles is there. Okay.
All right. So
and then Lee says hi. Okay. Are we gonna set it up so they can see him?
No.
Hear
it's
him.
It's just gonna be the audio. Like I said, what's happening is I'm recording this the video on my computer right now. That's gonna go into one file. I'm recording the audio, our video and audio on a separate file, and then worst case scenario, I have the live feed. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Fun as it is.
So you're good. Are you good, Lee?
I am. It's gone out to Facebook. I'm quickly tweeting it, and then I'm good to roll.
All right, sounds good. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Yeah,
with the tech.
people will join us as time goes on. So, what I'm going to wind up doing is later I'm going to wind up shooting an opening and closing for it, so that we can just go right into it and not worry about all the. Saying hey and hi and everything. We'll just
and we can put your website or whatever you.
Yeah, that'll all be when I go do the final edit. So, always fun technical garbage. So,
as somebody who podcasts usually regularly. I've been off for the last 2 months, but I love the doing intricate interviews with people, then later being like, all right, now let's get rid of all of those ums.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't done a podcast in a while, but going in and just getting rid. I mean, it's like just click.
He trained me how to do it. He's like, now go through and slow the audio down and go and delete this
Yeah, and then you want to make sure there's enough space where it doesn't seem unnatural, and it's like all these random things.
But can we do a test? Can people, Lee, can you say something? We'll see if people can hear you on the live.
Hello, beautiful beings. Can you hear me out there in the world?
Can you hear Lee, guys? I don't know. We're waiting for someone to see if they can...
Can they...
It's slow sometimes.
Frog. I like frogs. If frogs had a sex life, which I'm sure they do, they may or may not talk about themselves in this way. Frog is in the third gender-neutral frog rather than frog or frogette.
Somebody hears you, yeah.
Yeah, so we're good.
I love the frogette.
I'll appreciate my random ranting on.
All right. I think because of your energy, people tend to twist this. Your pronouns are he and him, right? Not they, them.
I usually tend to use he and him. My joke is that if my high heels are over 2 inches, feel free to do with that as you want.
Okay.
But I appreciate you clarifying and asking. Yes, I do tend to use he and him.
Okay, just so everyone knows, please be respectful, use he, him pronouns. Important.
So, let's just get started then.
I'm excited! Sorry, I'm so excited over here.
Yeah, and my random leather pride flag in the back that I seem to always have. So, yeah, that's always become part of my normal scenery for some reason.
Hi guys on the feed, I'm so excited.
Okay. So, first question. Let's just go ahead and have you introduce yourself and let people know who you are.
Yeah, my name is Lee Harrington. I'm a sexuality educator, author, presenter, performance artist, and troublemaker. I'm based up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I've been traveling the world talking about sex and kink and spirituality for part-time since 2000 and full-time since 2006, so it's been a couple days.
Right.
And in the kink community, I started out doing a lot of stuff in the rope bondage world, but nowadays have spread out across experiences, and right now I'm really passionate about the intersections of gender as well as spirituality in with our sexuality, and yes is usually my answer to a lot of different things.
So the first real question I want to ask is, what is your origin story?
My origin story. So when I was 7 years old, my parents had stopped having sex with one another and I could tell this because they stopped sleeping in the same bed, and my father's porn collection became easier to find. Which, these are just general clues, at least to the 7-year-old mind. And I had read the entire encyclopedia that we had, the Encyclopedia Britannica, because it was that time period where everybody still had their Encyclopedia Britannica in their house. And I'd read all of that. I'd read all the Mercedes Lackey books available on hand and Anne McCaffrey books.
At 7 years old?
Well, I was a voracious reader. I went to school starting a year and a half early. So, yeah, I was that kid, right? Yeah, I graduated with my BA by the time I was 20. So, I was that kid. Anyway, so I'd read a lot of what was available to me, and so when I came across my father's porn collection, I just read it as if it was books. And I read a lot of stuff, and I remember finding, I want to say it was a 1986 Penthouse Forum, and it was the story of this girl, Dear Penthouse, let me tell you a story, kind of,
Yeah, I remember those. Yeah.
And I remember reading that it was this girl's story about how she was, 21 years old, and it was her birthday, and they kidnapped her and blindfolded her and drove her around until they took her to her friend's house that had a stone slab in the basement. Now, here I am. I've been at the scene for over 20 years now. I have yet to meet anyone with a stone slab in their basement.
Yeah.
But in the story, this woman she's still blindfolded, she's tied up, they eat pudding off of her latex catsuit, as one does. And they end up ripping the catsuit off of her, which is an expensive thing to do, but my childhood mind did not know that. And they end up having group sex with her, and then they drip wax on her, lower the candles on her body, and then sing happy birthday, and then unblindfold her. And what struck me in the story was that she said that all of her friends in the local kinky sex community helped make her dreams come true. Thank you, Penthouse. I want to say I've been reading porn for about a year at this point, so probably around age 8 or 9. And I remember being struck by the idea that there was no guilt in the story. There was no shame. All of the other stories that I was reading in pornography were the girl next door, and I'll always look at her longingly, but will never do anything again.
Right.
Or I cheated on my wife.
Right.
Or there's something taboo and wrong with this story, or there was something like that embedded in all of these porn stories in what was hot, like what the titillation value was this notion of taboo. And I remember being really struck by the notion of having friends who would make any of your fantasies come true, whether it was sexual or otherwise. And I remember being a small child and going, when I grow up, I want to be kinky. And it wasn't about the sex, though some of those were hot too.
Right.
It was the idea that no matter who I was, or what I was into, or who I was into, there were people out there who wanted to be my friends and make my dreams come true. And I've been pretty blessed that in the kink community, traveling around, I've been able to find friends who've helped make my dreams come true, no matter who I'm into or what I'm into.
That's beautiful.
So what was your first introduction into the community? What was your first, beyond the reading, the actual physically going to a location and, meeting people? What was that like for you?
Well, there's two different forms to that. One is meeting people, and the other one is a public community.
Right.
I first got involved with somebody through my Unitarian Universalist youth camp, as one does.
Yeah.
Because nothing says Unitarian Universalist youth camp like kinky sex.
Yeah.
And I met a boy who was about 2 years older than me, and he had been a leather boy. He was only 16 at the time, 15, 16. But by then, he'd buried 2 of his lovers from AIDS. Because, this is mid-90s.
Right.
And however we feel about pedophilia, it was just part of the story. And I remember, his experience of what kink or leather was, or BDSM was very much of the notion and experience that if you're ever going to dominate, you have to submit first.
Yeah,
if you're ever to command, you have to be able to experience first.
Yeah. Just as a side, that was kind of my experience coming into the community. Yeah. That was a very old tradition, especially leather tradition of you start off in the submissive role and then move your way up to a dominant role. And it's in a way I'm kind of sad to see that go, because people who are long-termers, they just come in and go, I'm a this. And it's like they don't have a journey to follow to get to that point. They just start at that point. So I definitely understand what you're talking about.
Well, the negative thing with doing it that way was that it also came with a lot of abuse, or what could be looked back on easily as abuse, because the story that you can never follow your dream or your passions unless you do exactly what your dominant partner says can be easily taken in a really coercive way, if not abusive way. And so that, and that's not a universal experience, actually. If we look historically at gay men's communities or, leather communities, it's not a universal experience. It was just a lot more common at that time.
Right.
And so I started getting involved with him. So I was a teen at that point, and about 13, 14. And at 16 is when part 2 of that answer comes in, which is under a fake ID. Which actually I'm very grateful for this. Because I would argue it literally saved my life. Under a fake ID, I went to a space called Beyond the Edge Cafe in Seattle, Washington. And by this time, I'd done some things that would be considered really hardcore play by a lot of folks. And I was a teen, and I didn't have an awareness, because the teen mind doesn't have a perspective on what is normal.
Right.
And what is acceptable. And I have permanent body scars that I don't want. Based on what would be called play by some people that I did with him, and with other people that he informed me I would be playing with. And so at 16, I went to my first play party, and I remember, and I was assigned female at birth. I've lived full-time publicly as a man for the last over 10 years now. And the average person walking down the street would have no idea I was assigned female at birth, because I got a bushy beard and a furry belly, and I just look kind of dapper.
Yeah.
And I remember being at that play party, and I was in some girly girl outfit, and I'm watching this scene where somebody who was male identifying or male presenting was spanking somebody who was female presenting, and then she said a magic word, and he stopped. And I'm watching this scene, and I look over to the woman next to me. I'm like, so what just happened? And she said she used her safe word. And I, trying my best not to be shamed and trying not to be caught as being an underage person in a club, I said, what does that mean to you?
You love to use that phrase too, and even in your class. I love that. That's great.
Well, it's actually one that I feel like I got that term somewhere in high school, and it really applies to life, right? Because when somebody says a word, it doesn't mean I know what you mean. And I said, well, what does that mean to you? And she said, it's when you don't want to necessarily stop the scene per se, but you like just have to stop and check in, and you're able to communicate even when you're role playing that like something's going on either physically or emotionally that you just need to pause for a second. I went, of course. And I rewound in my head the last 2 years all of a sudden in that moment, and had to face the notion that I wasn't sure, and to this day, it depends on how I'm interpreting it, was I abused as a teenager by somebody who was using this term, dominant and master,
right,
as a way to get away with it? Or did I have intense physical learning experiences where I got to bear, like through my body, learn things that are a blessing? And I think it really depends on the day and how I'm analyzing it. But I remember in that moment, 16 years old, thinking this has, like, I realized this is going to change, this word that I have just heard has changed my life. And when I meet people now who are in the kink communities, and that's one of the first things I get exposed to, I have these moments of envy where I go, wow, what would my life have been like if I'd been over 18 when I got involved in kink publicly or physically, and just physically, and I'd had a more evolved adult mind, or perhaps over 24 when the human mind doesn't have that elasticity anymore and has, has the ability to think with a full adult comprehension. What would that have been like, right? What would it have been like to know the word safe word,
right,
and be able to say, no, I don't, I mean it when I say I don't want you to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of a wave is what it sounds like to me. And a lot of what you're saying from your journey sounds like a lot of the things you say. Like, I can really feel, everyone can't really see you right now, but Lee is very expressive. And I can see that this is a super personal, I mean, I've read some of your books and stuff, so I guess I know a little bit, but it just seems like there is such an emotional and like deep place that you're coming from when you're sharing your story with us. So I just want to appreciate that for you sharing that with us. I feel really honored.
Well, thank you. And I think it's one of those really interesting things for me sometimes, because it depends on the day I tell my story, which I think is true for everyone listening to.
Yes.
Right? That when you talk about your first job, which piece of the story are you telling today? Are you talking about the crappy hours? Are you talking about the asshole who flirted with you? Are you talking about that first client who really appreciated you? Are you talking about that moment of pride? Are you talking about that moment of sorrow when you lost that job? Like, which piece of a story, how are you curating your journey today?
right.
And I think for all of us, when we're telling our sexual story and our relationship journeys, each person we share it with, we curate it based on who we're talking to and who we are in that moment. And so it's funny because I've had people be like, well, I didn't know you were 16. And I'm like, yep, that's because you didn't know. And I've actually spent a lot of time in the last 5 or 6 years having sit-down conversations with people who I put at legal risk. Those probably like 40 people that I played with that first year, like those first 2 years before I turned 18, because I was and still am a slut. And so I look back and I've been trying to find people, 1 or 3 at a time, and ask whether they're open to have those conversations.
Right.
And that's also included having conversations looking back at poor behavior times I've had in the scene. Because, you know what? I know a lot of people out there who've had sub or dom frenzy. Have either of you had that moment where you're just like, yes, I will do all of the things now?
Yes, of course.
And sometimes we make bad decisions based on it, right? Or make decisions that affect other people's hearts.
Right. But I also think that the journey within the community, we kind of have to make those bad decisions. I think if you just do everything perfectly along the line, you're not learning the real deep lessons that are needed to do this life in a way that is fulfilling not only for you but for the people you're playing with.
Interesting. Do you believe that people can learn from other people's mistakes?
I think they can, but it's not as personal. I think that it's like I look back at my journey to this point, and choosing to be with this person who ultimately wound up leading me into something that was bad. It started off like it was going to look great, but then I didn't notice the red flags along the way. Whereas if I had and now the next time I do that journey, I will see all those red flags. But if somebody was to tell me about those red flags, I wouldn't necessarily know.
All the time, though.
Right.
Especially with the S side. Sorry to interrupt, Master, but like it happens all the time. Like, and I guess my opinion's a little different, and that I feel everything happens for a reason. I'm a very spiritual person, and I believe that we go through a lot of things in life in order to grow and be more and connect more. So my view is that we suffer in order to advance. So I think that you can learn from other people, and of course, in the submissive and slave communities, people weren't, don't watch out for this, watch out for that. But until you experience that, you drop or that thing yourself, it's not as tactile and real. Especially because what we're doing is dealing with all of those pieces of ourselves.
Yeah, to develop almost, I'm hearing like a body memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like the difference between a theory and a body embedded experience.
Right. And so, do you have experiences like that in your life that you'd be willing to share?
Absolutely. Let's see, what's an example? I'll throw one out there, which was understanding the differences between taking somebody on a rope journey and actually doing it. So I'd been getting tied up for, like a number of years at this point, but my first submissive person who entrusted themselves to me. I mean, I'd done some stuff privately, but somebody who once I was in the scene. So let's reframe that. Not people who I'd done stuff with, before then, but once I was publicly in the scene, and that I had done stuff with people one-on-one before that. But this was the first time somebody said, "No, I really would like to submit to you." And even though I'd done stuff, in bedrooms and behind closed doors, it was kind of fooling around, and I didn't really have a consciousness with what I was doing. It was hot, it was sexy, it was good times. And there was this moment for me where I, had seen other people do scenes and like these really pre-constructed concepts, and I'd really appreciated oh, look, and the people had talked to me about, oh, look at the trust that they're giving me, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And then there was this moment that this guy was tied up in front of me, and he had gone from this point of being playful and bantery to this moment of silence, to a moment of his head turning slightly sideways, and this rush came up in my chest of, oh, that's what they were talking about. Was being able to feel this wave of trust come off of him, rather than it being a wave of hot, sexy, spanky spank.
All right. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, yeah.
But it was this moment of getting that somebody else was going to trust me.
Right.
Because I trusted other people, but it was, even my own internal experience of it didn't end up feeling the same as looking down at someone and understanding in that moment they weren't just submitting, but they were surrendering.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that you can only really learn from experience. I mean, I can tell people, I mean, it's like I've spent 10 years trying to tell people what the scene is like, but it's like, until you actually are physically doing these things, it's like I'm professionally, I'm a cook, and it's like I can watch Food Network shows and see how to make different things, but until you actually get in and actually try to make it's all theory at that point. Until you're actually hands-on doing it. And I think the exact same thing is true with the community, how you can tell people all day long, this is, here's how it feels to me, and here's how I feel, and blah, blah, blah. But until they actually get in and do it themselves,
right,
you're going to hit an emotional brick wall every time.
It's also different. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
It's also so different, like you said, depending on where you are that day, and maybe your first experience, you could look at it in two different ways. For a lot of people, a lot of the experiences they have, they can look at it in so many different ways, and where you are in your life, where you are in your relationships, your job, I mean, it really changes what you feel about things.
Absolutely, and it's one of the reasons I'm really grateful for people who are professional dominants and people who do or professional submissives, who, for people who don't have that skill set yet and have a nervousness around going into public kink spaces, not having that kinesthetic, not having that physical, tangible, hands-on experience, finding people who can be those guides for you, who don't have a potential, that have a transactional experience, that after the scene is done, we don't have to carry story anymore.
Right.
You don't owe me anything. We're good. I think there could be a huge blessing from going and finding somebody that comes well respected, who comes well reviewed, rather than finding somebody on Craigslist, like going on some of the professional sites and find people who are really well reviewed. I feel really blessed from when I did professional dominance periods of time by the people who came to me for their very first experiences and said, I want to know what this feels like before I go out and try to find my way publicly. And then there's also groups like, or events, like I do a 3-day Sacred Kink Initiatory Intensive where we go through a whole series of different ways to approach kink and do experiences. And I've had people who have come from the Tantra community who have never done any SM, and by the end of the weekend have had all of these different experiences. Or I look at Midori does an intensive called Fort Femme,
yes,
which is just for women to find their dominant voice. And she brings in people who are, both she and Cleo Dubois, who runs sm-arts.com, both of them do intensives. Cleo both for just women, but also for mixed gender experience groups. And Midori, they bring in people who are skilled at surrendering, to let people feel in their hands what that's like. Because sometimes, at least for myself, I've had moments where I've tried things for the first time. It was my partner trying things for the first time, where suddenly both of us were scared. That's not a bad thing. Peer-to-peer learning education is also awesome. So is having somebody who's been in the scene for a long time trusting you. I've done things as a top that I've had people who've been bottoms, who are bottoms in the scene for 30 years, who let me try that thing out for them. And by being experienced, powerful bottoms and recipient partners, they were able to communicate back to me in ways that I learned. What a gift.
Right.
And to me, with all of these different ways of learning and doing, it's about acknowledging the power in the room, especially in the time period that we're at around the Me Too conversation, and right now in the kink community around acknowledging poor behaviors done by some people who are running groups or who are teachers who have taken advantage in the past 20 years of their place in their sexual community. And because of their power dynamics. I think it's about acknowledging the power dynamics we have. And if we are two beginners, acknowledge that we're both beginners. And we might run into some bumps. But acknowledge and be willing to sit down outside of a scene and say, you know what, we hit a bump. What are we going to do today? Right? Or if I'm playing with somebody who's been in the scene for 20 years, I don't care if they're a top or a bottom, we have an unspoken power dynamic there.
Well, I think that's...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one reason why, like, I'm a massive proponent of doing a post-mortems on scenes. It's during the aftercare, after you get through the initial aspects of the aftercare, have the conversation about what was right, what was wrong, what was good, what was bad. Because when I'm in the middle of a scene, I'm pretty decent at reading the person I'm playing with, but I'm not going to be able to read everything. I'm not a mind reader. So it's nice to have that moment. So I don't know if that's something that you do or something similar to that.
Well, it's interesting. I find for myself as a bottom, and this is why I stopped doing that exactly, I found for myself as a bottom, if I did that right after a scene, and I mean within the next 4 hours, I ended up starting to rewrite what the scene was like.
Oh, okay.
I started telling myself what was wrong. I started looking for things that were wrong. So instead, I actually was gifted this tool by a Tantra priestess, a Tantrika, and I was helping do a session with her. It was a combination Tantra and professional dominance session with her. And what she does after her scenes is she sits down with people for food, right? And we're not talking like gummy bears available in the food area of your local SM club. She sits down for a really hearty meal, and she asks everybody in the circle to tell a snapshot of something beautiful, something that happened for them in that moment or during the scene. And I remember the guy that we were dominating saying, it was so amazing. There was a moment that I was with you, and that he, being me, was over in the corner staring at us, and I felt this moment like he was focusing on us and almost controlling us with his mind, and it was so sexy. And I remember being quiet in that moment going, what was actually happening in my mind at that moment was me thinking, what the fuck am I doing next? And I have an hour left. What the fuck are we going to do? But what was amazing to me is that instead of saying that out loud, I got to hear his beauty first and then not pop his bubble. Because if I'd shared my challenge first, I think I could have affected his story that was so hot and powerful for him. So I'm a big fan now of having people tell their snapshots after scenes. And then maybe a couple of days later or before we play again, asking the questions, what was really hot for you? What can we do more of? What would you like to see in addition? And what could we do better? Instead of focusing on the things that got wrong, right? Because people will end up throwing that out in conversation if something went really sideways, right? It will end up coming out in the conversation. I find most of the time. Or even the question of, what would you like to avoid next time?
Right, I can place
Instead
it
of
in
saying,
there.
like, this is bad. Because at least for myself as a submitting partner, it's very easy, and maybe it's based off, like, my father's side of the family and Catholic guilt, right? Like, whatever it is, right? It can be very easy for me to say, I did wrong. Especially when I am a surrendering partner, because I identify as a yes-e, all of the above. I'd say switch. Actually, there was a term that I was gifted by Ariana Grandhawk. Is that her last name? Ariana Hawk. Anyway, she's she identifies in Chicago. This person identifies as a rheostat, which is a technical term for a dimmer switch.
Okay.
And so I'm a big fan of like that notion of I play all over the dial. Right? Who are we as 2 or 12 individuals in this scene today? Let's play there. And I think for myself, especially when I'm on that end of the dial that's surrendering, it's so easy for me to think I fucked up. If only I could have held that tie for longer. If only I could have taken that cock deeper. If only I could have known that my dominant partner wanted me to know X, Y, or Z. If only... You know what? That doesn't help.
Yeah, I have anxiety, so I totally go there. It's so tough because on my channel I talk about slavery and a lot of the challenges with mental health, and it's so hard because I can get out of my head, but then sometimes I'll go back in my head in the scene. I'm like, don't go in your head, don't go in your head, and then I'm like not able to fully be present and process the stimuli in the way that I really want to surrender, but sometimes I'm not. And so usually I want to talk about it because I'm like, oh, I had this thing in my head and I just need to get it out. But sometimes having that time to process also and just not give in to those thoughts and later process can be valuable too. Of other partners, I've done that. Yeah.
And I love that notion that it's also about taking the steps based on who's in the circle at that time. Who is here? Because if I'm with a partner who really wants to process right now, if I have the ability to do so, I would love to offer that gift to them of processing right now.
Right.
But I've also learned for myself that what is the best for all of the people involved in this scene is to also say, I would love to process that with you. Do you really need to do that? Do you need to do that right in this moment? Or would you be open to doing that after we have protein?
Right, and chocolate, too. Chocolate can...
Yeah, exactly. How do you come back into this skin suit and into the here and now? And for some people, it's I need to go cry in a corner, like, because people talk about aftercare, right? Which all aftercare means is the care you need after a scene. That's all it means. For some people, that's a fuzzy blanket and a box of truffles. I know a lot of tops who love that shit, right? And by tops, I mean bring your tops some truffles.
Right. You mentioned this one in the interview with Evie. Yeah, I loved this whole section about that. Yeah.
And for other people, it's I need to go cry in a corner, or let's go grab a meal together, or let's watch a dumb movie, or curl up together, spooning and making out and fucking each other's brains out, falling asleep, and talking about it tomorrow over lunch. Like, everybody's body is different, and owning that difference, I think, is so cool. Like, just who's here in the circle, and acknowledge it together. I think that's awesome.
Right, and it's beautiful about how you can choose, right? Choose your own adventure is, like, one of the things I love. Yeah, it's like, choose your adventure, right? Maybe you know when you're negotiating with somebody, oh, I like to do the post-mortem, right? I like to, this is what I need, but then you get in that situation, and it's like, I'm feeling triggered by this, or I'm feeling this, and I want to table this to later. And I've had that with people before, when what we initially, you know, what happens in the scene is what we negotiated, but then, you know, things feel different after. I've had people where it felt so bad to me, I didn't want to have any contact with them, or I needed some time before those things happen. And it's not that anyone's bad, or it's just sometimes you get really like, this just wasn't working for me. It felt so all these ways, and, you know, those things happen. So being present is in where you are at whenever that comes up for you.
Yeah, and I find that that's especially true, that I can't provide aftercare if I've been the villain for someone, right? If we've done role-playing where I have been the angry, scary molester, or if I'm the clown. No, it's really hard. Is scary clown giving you aftercare?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you okay, little boy? Right, there's like where it's, let's go get out of his clothes and take a shower. Or having somebody's best friend be there to be aftercare at a public event.
Right.
Have them be able to come in if we've pre-negotiated with them, or if they've borne witness. You know, can you come in and do this?
Well,
I have a friend of mine who does a lot of kidnapping scenes. He loves them. He's very, very technical. And he ends up doing kidnapping scenes for gay men where that person's husband or boyfriend doesn't want to be the villain. That guy wants to be able to come in and be the white knight and the hero and the person who rescues them and who holds them afterwards. Because, I mean, those kinds of really intense scenes, there are people who after them end up looking at you like you're the bad guy for a while. And so I think it's worth considering, too, before you go down any of those places that I refer to as the dark pudding of the soul. Right? If you're playing off those deep ends, there are some people who they'll need their aftercare from someone else, or may need time before they can see you as the good guy. And when I say that, provide aftercare that means everybody in the scene getting aftercare.
Yeah, tops, everybody.
Well, I think that's something I've run across, is a lot of people don't understand that tops in a scene need aftercare just as much as, you know, the person that they're, you know, that's the bottom in the scene. It's like, no, it's like I've just gone on this emotional journey as well, where I've taken this instrument and I've used it to try to damage your body. That's emotionally hard for somebody who, you know, that's, you know, it's like I don't do that in the real world, but here I'm setting you on fire. And it's like, you know, it's like, and I know that, you know, mentally that I'm not going to hurt you.
Well, and, you know,
right, but
harm you or whatever.
Right, but there's still that thing in the back of my head that goes, this could go wrong any second.
Yeah.
And I'm having to play on that razor's edge all the way. And it's like, after everything is said and done, yeah, I need to be able to calm down and cuddle and hold the person I just did this vile, vicious thing to, and know that they're okay.
Yeah.
You know?
I would say I also see that a lot for people who are raised male in our culture, who are doing anything that looks assaultive to people who are visibly, who appear to them and or are female.
Right.
Because there's a lot of folks who have grown up with domestic violence being a really real thing. And suddenly you are your own perpetrator. You are replicating the things that look like what somebody did to your own mother. Or who are, now you are the bad guy in culture. And we don't have necessarily, there's not necessarily a lot of tools of dialogue for men to talk to other, dominant men to talk to other dominant men about being perpetrators. And I would love to see more discussion spaces for, or for people in general who are tops, who are doing physical activities that look like actual assault, right? Because play piercing, when I'm doing decorative patterns with 3,000 things with feathers, doesn't necessarily look like domestic assault, right? But when we're talking about punching,
right,
spanking, slapping, leaving bruises on someone's body. Though, as a note, if you're listening and you're thinking, "Oh my God, am I assaulting someone, or is that, you know, like, is this domestic abuse, or is this play?" I love the language that I don't remember if Lokai or Barrick came up with this, but what they do when they do medical trainings for people in ERs, they explain the difference between SM and assault when you're looking at the human body is that domestic assault is not symmetrical.
Great point.
Like, I mean, most, like, if I'm doing SM, most often, like, and I'm spanking someone, I'm doing 3 strikes on the left, 3 strikes on the right in that sweet spot, going back and forth. Like, I'm heating up both sides of the body for the highest amount of sexual arousal. Unless, of course, I'm doing a scene that's meant to be, assholey.
Or cathartic with some trauma or, something very specifically targeting, yeah.
Right, but most of the time, it's flogging on both sides of the body, caning on both sides of the body. And if I was actually assaulting someone, it's 1 strike really hard. That's most of the time not what we're doing in SM. And so if you're like, if that's one of the quickest and easiest ways to start the conversation. If it is symmetrical, probably not domestic assault. You can now move that over onto the category of.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's like, yeah.
I'll be right back. I'm going to the bathroom.
I think the thing that it's like I'm coming from a weird place, partially because one of my former slaves, we got into a domestic violence situation where I was actually the receiver of the abuse, and it's like trying to talk to people about being the receiver of abuse as a dominant in a relationship. There seems to be this massive disconnect. They don't understand that it's nothing to do with what I, who I am as a person, is, but it becomes this cycle of being trapped, of, trying to, and especially being the type of person I am, having the I need to fix it kind of mentality, and it just really is confusing. I think that I'm interested to see from your point of view, from where you're coming from, with people, especially like somebody like in my position, being able to talk to people in the community about it without feeling weak is really difficult.
Yeah, and so there's a couple different things there. One of the most common forms, because I see actually a number of dominant people who get verbally assaulted on a regular basis by people who are on the quote S side of a slash.
Right.
Are you not big enough to do that? You're not strong enough? What, you're too much of a pussy? Like, that kind of shit I see happen a lot. Some of it done playfully, but some of it done on a cruel level.
Right.
I have seen people hit their partners enough so that their partner will finally lash back in anger because they're trying to get attention in some way, shape, or form. That stuff comes up all of the time, and we don't. I mean, even if you look, there's a really fascinating series of videos that were done a while back of women, and this is a gender biased statement, so we're just going to acknowledge that out loud before I share the following story. But when men were saying mean things or pushing a female partner in public, people stepped in within seconds of it happening. Women saying the exact same words and physically pushing and then punching and then hurting men in public, people were laughing at the whole thing. Even when it was above and beyond for minutes at a time of people doing these experiments. There's just people in public just laughed. And so, because there's this story that what'd the guy do to deserve that? And so if we look at it from that gender-biased perspective, there is that. But then if we look at it with the notion of dominance and submission, well, what did he do to deserve that? What did she do to deserve that? Right? As the top, clearly. And so now there's this story that to have received abuse, clearly you did something wrong. Wow, how fucked up is that in culture?
See, now we're reclaiming it, though, by coming from our place of, this is my yes, like you're saying, going into your yes, or whatever it may be.
Part of it. I think that one of the questions that was brought to the table when you were out of the room is this notion of how do we then discuss it in community without being seen as weak? And I think the first thing is to find peership, right? Instead of having the conversation in front of the entire community, finding other peers who are having those challenges too. I have a sock puppet account. My sock puppet account is entirely used for conversations I don't want done under my legal name.
Right.
Who I don't want done under my name. So I have a profile that is also a transgender man who is not based in my home city.
Right.
That I am subscribed to certain groups that I have conversations on, and I share I share my life. I don't share that I'm a sex educator.
Right.
But I share the things that happen in various dialogues, because through that anonymity, I consider a degree of safety. I developed tools through having conversations with peers.
Right.
So that's one tool that I use. Another tool I'm a big fan of is finding submissive only or dominant only circles that I can have FaceTime with, or finding 2 or 3 people in person to have coffee with.
I have a slave group that I'm a part of, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're actually trying to set up to have, like, when they're having their slave circle group, all the masters will go to a bar. And it's like, I know that just sitting around together, we're going to talk shop, and we're going to go through stuff, and then eventually we'll get to a point where we get to being able to actually talk about what is happening in our relationships. Yeah. Because especially coming from a master side or a dominant side, sometimes it's really hard to have the conversations about what it is that I'm doing in my relationships, because to most people to the outside world, I seem like an abusive asshole, you know. But it's like, internally, it's not only not that, it's actually welcomed. And it's getting, people to understand, trying to get people to understand that is incredibly difficult. Especially, like, I can't even bring up 90% of what I do with her to somebody who's vanilla, because immediately they would go, "What do you mean you have her, have her take your shoes off at night? What do you mean she makes your bed and puts out your clothes for your bed?" And it's like, immediately I'm seen as the bad guy.
I order his food for him. That's one of his rules, and I did it in front of his family because I didn't even think about it, and they were kind of like...
They gave a weird look. And it's like...
Well, and I think part of that is developing trust and peership. I'm part of a leather tribe, a kinky community, whatever we're calling it today, called Deviate, down in Arizona. And one of the things that these folks have been partying together and having monthly parties for 8 years. That's a lot of parties when it's talking about a group of 30 people, right? Plus their friends. But it's usually just the main 30 people. After a while, that becomes a really close-knit community. Because what they do ritually is that everybody has to be in the doors by 9 o'clock. Because at 9:30, there's an opening circle. They don't call it an opening circle because they're not woo-woo like that. I call it an opening circle from my own projection of being woo-woo like that. But it's everybody who doesn't know each other. Say your name. Anybody have a fetish or a fantasy for tonight? Share it out loud. You never know. Somebody might be wanting to do that too. Right? Anybody's going to be doing a complex, crazy scene? When are you doing it? Need help? Right? So it's this playful thing. But what ends up happening is about 2 years in, a group of the guys, it's predominantly male dominant and then all genders submissive, but I'd say 80-20. Right, but it was a group of the male doms who were having problems exactly with that they had female partners that they were feeling they were being abusive to. And those 5 guys started to get together for a male dom, femme sub discussion. And they would order food, and they would choose a topic every month. And what happened is it took 2 years to have the place to even have that conversation. Right.
It can take a while to get over the gender. I have a lot of feelings about the gender stuff. I just like to call it gender stuff.
Well, they intersect. These things they are compounding conversations. That we have dominance and submission, compounding with gender stories within culture, right? Men submitting to men, different conversation than women submitting to women. Different conversation than transgender people and gender queer people across the gender spectrum, submitting to other people who are walking a gender diverse history, right? Like, we've got layers of that conversation. And when we layer it on with financial differences, right? One person has more money than the other. Here's another layer of the conversation, especially with abuse. We're layering on race on top of that. We're layering around issues around does anybody in the discussion not have English first language? Is anybody in here dealing with immigration status discussions?
Trauma, anything that comes up for you?
Right. Yeah. All of them are compounding issues. And so there's going to be a slightly different dialogue. Right up here in Alaska right now, I started a group about 6 months ago called Trans Men of the North. And it's a monthly get-together at Starbucks in their side room that's willing to give it to us for free as long as somebody buys a coffee.
That's great.
And it's 2 hours of just people who were assigned female at birth, who are male or masculine spectrum individuals. But that's how they were assigned. Like, it's for us to get together and talk with other guys.
Right.
Whether it's talking about, like, shit about being transgender, or oftentimes just talking about our lives and our partners and whatnot. But because we have a shared peership, a different discussion happens. But it can be really challenging for an outsider who sees it's a group of dudes getting together to be like, dude, does male space really need to exist? Isn't there enough men's space in culture?
Right.
And the same thing happens. Like, isn't there enough dominant space in culture? And there's a lot of support and community for submissive circles, especially submissive female circles.
Right. And it's a challenge because I'm female presenting, but I'm queer. I identify as a queer femme, and I constantly pass. It's like, it seems like we're in a straight relationship. I don't consider myself, a woman. So it's always that, like, really difficult, like, I am very feminine dressing, but I am just me. Right. And so there's all the spaces are weird too. It can feel weird.
Visibility. And where is the safe space for submitting men? Right. Men who submit to men get a different level of support than men who submit to women.
Right.
Right.
No, I mean,
like, I know there's an amazing podcast. I don't know if it's still running. Whether it is or not, people look it up. Unspeakable Acts, AXE. Is a podcast that is or was run by a guy named Axe, and he's a submissive man living in New York, talking about his experience and interviewing people from the perspective of being a submissive man, and that voice doesn't get heard nearly often enough.
No,
there's an embedded story in our culture that says submissive men must clearly have something wrong with them.
Well, I kept getting weird messages from people, and I wound up doing a video. Couple years ago, or I think it's like a year or two ago, about just the concept of respecting straight submissive males. And it's like, do they deserve respect in our community? The answer is yes.
They are people.
Right. It's like, just because I'm not somebody who necessarily
it's not your yum.
It's not my thing, but it's like, just because it doesn't matter where they're coming in, what level they're coming in, show respect across the board to everybody.
Right.
And if it's not your thing, cool. I'm over here. You're over here. But I'm not going to stop you from doing what you're doing as long as everybody is consensual. Right. And and I understand it's because I was getting some... I had a couple female dominants who were just ranting about the straight male submissives being, so annoying and stuff. And I'm like, you know what? Here's the thing. They might be, that might feel like it in the beginning, but later down the road, you're going to find out this is a person who's actually somebody you enjoy being around. And it's like, you can't just assume just because this person is like this today that this is how all of them are. And I think with the community starting to become more mainstream, we're starting to see a lot of people come into the community that are like, this is who I am, this is what I am, everybody else should be like me. And
there was sorry, can I add something? So there was a video that Evie did recently about how some new people would send messages to her and ask, like, oh, I'm too old or too whatever to be in the scene. And I'm like, that breaks my heart. Like, or I'm too this, or I'm too gay, or I'm too whatever, I'm not pretty enough, or I'm too, whatever. It's like, you're not. No, it's not about how you look. Like, it really upsets me that people get this image of, like, straight couple that are thin and pretty, and it's like, screw that noise.
Well, it's like one of my favorite scenes. Sorry, just for a second. One of my favorite scenes of all time. And this was years ago, and so I'm pretty sure it's not going to be an issue. I was at a club in Los Angeles, and did a couple scenes. Good night. Just kind of crashed on the couch, and all night long there was this older couple. I mean, they're like in their 70s. Just wandering around the club. All of a sudden, they come up to where this table is. I'm assuming it's the husband from the way that they were acting. Bends this 70-year-old woman over, pulls up her skirt, pulls down her panties, spanks her a few times, pulls her panties up, put skirt back down. They hug each other and they walk away. And I'm like, that was amazing. That was absolutely beyond amazing because it was so basic and so simple, and
Hey, if it was their yum, I mean.
Right, but it's like, what that tells me is you know, there is no age limit in this community.
No. So, I am a big believer that all of us are just temporarily able-bodied. And all of us are temporarily young. Right. And so I love going to discussion circles that will allow me to be part of them for folks that are living their life as kinky people, AARP ages and older, right? Like that's, and I say that age cutoff because there's a group out of Ohio called Cobras, which I believe is kinky old bastards and broads really are sexy.
That's awesome.
And their requirement to be a member is that you have to have your AARP card. But they started their group because there were people coming in post-retirement, like they finally felt like grandkids are out of the nest, they can go be the kinky selves in public, who didn't want to go to classes learning from people that were age of their grandchildren.
Right.
There was a shame element there.
Right.
And also the shame element, especially of older men, being approached by younger women who were in their 40s and 50s, saying like, oh, clearly you're in your 70s, you've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
And this is somebody who's been doing it for 1 month. And so they started that group as a way to provide education and social support for people who were of that journey. And there was a class that I got to go to that was a discussion circle about aging and kink. And there was a pair of people who she had been doing kink she was in her 80s, somewhere in her 80s, and had been doing kinky stuff since she was in her 20s, so about 60 years. And they'd been together as a married couple for about 40 of those years, I want to say. And her fetish has been long-term bondage. That's one of her fetishes. But here she is in her 80s, and even mummy sacks can be tough on her body for more than 2 or 3 hours. He and his hands, being in his late 80s, are now starting to have some challenges, like tying knots. They got ratchet straps, like for trucks, and a Tempur-Pedic mattress. She lays down on a Tempur-Pedic mattress, slides underneath the ratchet straps. He straps her in, hard and firm. He then curls up next to her. Her hands are still free, so he reaches down and touches her. She can tap out on his leg even when he's sleeping. And she can sleep overnight in bondage. And I'm listening to this being like, oh my God, that's hot. But it's an idea. It would have never occurred to me if they hadn't come up with it out of a utilitarian need.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the greatest parts of the community is we all want to get to, to this point. Okay, whatever that point happens to be.
Yeah.
And
that fantasy, that whatever relationship,
right.
that whatever,
and,
that moment.
And it's like if I don't happen to own the toys, I'm gonna MacGyver the damn thing.
I have a giant double-sided dildo, which I have been known to beat people with when I top. It's fabulous.
Well, it's like I go back to when I very first got into life. The person who trained me after my first year. Her acknowledgement of me moving on to a place where she was wanting to start training me to be a top, is she threw me rope and said, make a flogger.
Yep.
I had no idea what I was doing. And all of my basic skill sets of learning of flogging, I learned off this stupid rope flogger that I made, the day that she said, oh, I'm going to start training you over here. And it's like, I own a bunch of other great floggers. I still have that rope flogger.
He in fact shows people that's the easiest way to learn how to.
Yeah, and it's like, it's like one of those things of this community is amazing at turning things that should never be used in, that are, and making them these amazing pervertible things. Yeah. It's just one of these, yeah.
I love unicorns, and I love to pervert the unicorns.
Yeah. It's one of those things of, I think that's one of the greatest aspects of the community is this idea of, I want to find some way to, to fuck you while you're upside down. Now, how the fuck am I going to do that? And it's like having to spend the time and energy to think about how to make it happen, and then doing it, and then other people hear about it, and next thing you know, it becomes a standard thing in the community. And it's this weird aspect of the community. I'm pretty sure that you've seen things that you're like, where the fuck did that come from?
It's awesome. You're like, where did it just...
Well, and it's very regionally. I'm very blessed that this being kink being my full-time career. I've taught in all 50 states, and one of the blessings that's come out of it is getting to see profound regional differences, right? Really distinct regional practices for a long time back in the 90s, the Northwest was called the bloodbath because the sheer number of lesbians doing blood scenes.
Wow.
Like there was just a gross quantity of them, and I don't mean like icky gross, I mean like just a volume. That was really amazing, but if you left the Northwest during that time period, it just wasn't a thing, right? Like just bathing in each other's blood wasn't really a thing, and people would be like, you what? As compared to, going to, I was in South Dakota recently, and one of the things that was regional was it just didn't matter if you kept all your toys straight. It was a matter of reaching in and grabbing the first thing that you found. It was like playing, like bobbing for apples, but it was like bobbing for toys. People just reached in their bag, and it was the next thing. I'm like, I don't know what's happening, but go you. That I just hadn't seen that as a game, but it was something that I saw more than once that night. And I'm like, oh, what a fun idea, right? Or ending up in SoCal, like in Southern California one time, and everybody and their monkey had a ball gag made out of rope. Everyone. And I'm like,
this is the thing?
This is the thing?
As somebody who grew up in the SoCal scene, came up in the SoCal scene, yeah. I've definitely seen that, and at one point had one. So I don't know why. It just was everybody had one. It was like, there it is.
Yeah,
so.
And those were all valuable and wonderful. And isn't it great to know the diversity of human interests? And it's funny that you say that kinksters trend towards pervertibles or confined pervertibles, because I know a lot of people who I don't identify as kinky who also use a lot of pervertibles. Like, it's, what do we have around? We're hot and turned on. We'll do the thing. The number of people I know, their first dildo, right? Their first dildo was a water bottle or
back of a hairbrush, the handle of a
hairbrush.
Yeah.
Or,
mine was a shaving cream can.
A what brand?
Shaving cream can, and I rubbed the shaving cream on me too. I was like, oh.
Nice.
But I think that
where people just like, will this fit in the hole?
Yeah.
Is a common game for many teenagers or 20-year-olds. Like, what will happen?
But I think
the story that we sometimes have, that kinksters are set apart by from the rest of humanity for doing this stuff, can sometimes create an us versus them unconsciously.
Yes.
I think the difference sometimes comes is that some people in kinky exploration start talking about it out loud.
Right.
And discussing it rather than just doing it.
Right. Oh, I wanted to bring something up. I don't know if you're allowed to speak on this or you know about this, but it's something that Master had found. There was a case of a guy in your area that had come forward and said that he did a scene with somebody. It's this whole big thing. I wondered if you were involved.
I guess he's a part of the government in Alaska. He got caught doing something, and then he blamed it on the fact his interest in BDSM. I don't know if you know much about that story.
Are you talking about a military person?
No. This was like a state representative or something, like in the House of Representatives in Alaska or something.
Oh, that. Yes, that just happened about a week ago. I do not have details beyond what's been reported in the ADN and whatnot, the Anchorage Daily News, and other news, KTUU and whatnot. I am not familiar with details beyond it, and I think it's one of the things that gets, like we were talking before about the idea of people just hear what I do with my partner and they assume it's abuse.
Right.
They said, like person one says this, person two says this. It's a tricky point to know which thing is real.
Right.
At times. And so since I don't know the details of the case beyond that, I'm going to choose not to say anything.
That's one of the that's why I haven't done a video on it yet, simply because, I've been caught up in this in the past where somebody did there was a report about this incident and it would involve kink, and then it later turned out that the other person was lying and turned to this, and so it's like, I feel kind of embarrassed of having done this story, done something on this story, because it might turn out that this was legitimate, and that the second person was doing this for some reason, because this guy's a politician and they want to try to get some 15 minutes of fame by claiming something, and it's like that might be true, or it might be what the other person said, which is this person took advantage of the situation and did something wrong. And it's like,
and there's layers of power. I mean, the Matt Lauer piece that came out, what was it, a couple months ago now, where he had a locking mechanism on his desk to be able to lock people into his room after they'd come into his office. My partner and I actually had a really fantastic conversation, a really interesting conversation about it, because we were like, now if that's just abuse of power because he was somebody who had the ability to affect someone else's career. Right? These were people either underemployed from him or under mentorship from him, either one, that there was a sexual interaction with, right? There was a tit for tat. Like, where is the notion of consent when coercion and or layers of effect are happening from an individual, right?
Like your job or your social standing.
Exactly. If they could lose their job, is there ever actual true consent, right? This gets talked about a lot. And it was funny because, like, we had this challenge where it's like, okay, yeah, that's wrong that he was able to do this, blah, 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 but that's kind of hot.
Right? That's the great thing about being a pervert, though,
Well, I think that's part of, like, I hear a lot of these stories, and I'm like, yeah, you guys are all morons, this was bad, this was stupid, this was not the smartest way of doing things. But if I was to do this with consent, this would be fun. And I think that's one of the, it's like, it's like I go to the TJ Miller thing. I don't know if you've heard much about this. He's being accused of all these things by this one particular woman, but then we come to find out, she's done this thing, and it's been, she's been lying about these things for years. And now all of a sudden, because of the Me Too movement, she's back at it again and potentially going to ruin some guy's career. And it's like, I have to take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt. I'm not just going to, it's like, I don't want to necessarily just go, oh yeah, that's all true. Because you hear this stuff in the community a lot. Somebody will say, they had a bad experience with somebody, and all of a sudden now this person, even though during the scene they did nothing wrong, it turned out to be bad in the end.
Right, like I mentioned, like it just didn't feel good. But it was everything you had negotiated.
And now all of a sudden this guy or this girl's reputation is destroyed because one person didn't get the experience they thought they were going to get. And I think that's kind of where we're in this weird phase, not only in general society, but in the community, of calling out bad actors.
Like you had said earlier.
Right. Yeah. But then at that point, it's kind of comes to a point of, where do we draw the line? Because this might, in retrospect it might have been bad, but at the time it was consensual. And that's where, I think some issues are going to come up within the community down the road.
Well, and that goes back to that layering I was talking about, right? If somebody has financial control over someone else, right? If they are potentially getting hired because, right, X, Y, or Z happened, which is why the discussion around Reed Mihalko is such a big piece right now, because if people have a chance to look up that piece, including how he has responded, both the original response as well as his updated response of apology. Looking at that conversation, because he was affecting somebody's ability to get, another sex educator's ability to get work, right? Was that truly consent? If that happened, right? Same thing happens with, there's been a number of people who've been called out in the community recently who are predominantly heterosexual men who are over the age of 35, playing with experience, a minimum of 5, if not 20 years of experience in the scene, playing with inexperienced women under the age of 25 for the most part, who have had bad behaviors, often which in conjunction with dominance and submission, either in the scene or in the relationship. And the question comes up of, if somebody said they were fine in the moment, but it wasn't actually fine because they were scared of losing their home. They were scared that they weren't smart enough to know that they were told that this is what a real submissive does. That whole real submissive
I hate the term real in the community.
Or true.
Or true. Yeah, because I think that I've always been of the opinion of there's a lot, there's a lot of wrong ways to do it, but there's no one right way of doing it. It's what works for you and the person you are doing it with.
But if you have somebody who's not experienced in communities and not experienced in how to, because they had a lot of people who said, well, that person should have just spoken up during it or spoken up afterwards.
But they didn't know the difference.
Women, especially younger women in our culture, are just now, in the last 10 years of education, being taught how to speak up, and that's even regionally.
Yeah.
Right? As somebody who was assigned female at birth, that was not as, like, I was lucky that my mother was in the Army and taught me how to speak up a little better. But that's not, like, I know so many people who went to college because that's how they could hook a man.
Yeah, me too.
Because that's what their mother told them to do. And especially when I'm talking to older women who grew up either as baby boomers or during the silent generation during the Korean War era, etc. Like, those conversations are even less so around how do you know whether this is what you want or not.
It's hard. There's a hard balance.
Yeah. And when you balance that out with people who are also sexually submissive.
I am.
Right. Is sexually submitting, asking the question of what kind of kink do you like also has layers to it. Yeah. It's like, these are the activities I kind of like, but if you're getting turned on, that kind of outweighs this, so I don't know how to answer that question. And so when people say consent is not just freely given, but enthusiastic, that word enthusiastic has layers to it as well. These are muddy topics.
Yeah.
To me, one of the big things is when somebody is called out for poor behavior, right? What is the next step of what they do?
Do they run away? Do they try to make right in the community? What do they do? Sometimes they get kicked out. Like, we had the situation out here where...
Even with that person, are they saying, I'm sorry you feel hurt? Or do they say, I'm sorry I hurt you? Right.
Are they recognizing where they're...
Hurt? Yeah, I'm sorry you felt hurt means it's about you and you're crazy.
Right.
And I default that way because I don't want to own that somebody else got hurt by me. But I know people have gotten hurt by me.
That's one of the biggest things, Lee, I've learned from my time in kink, and even in my, like, I have a best friend who's a slave, and even in our friendship over the last 13 years, I'm 26, so we've been friends since we were in adolescence. Just the awareness of where you're at, if you're able to talk about something, where your feelings are, that is so important, and it's so hard. Like, I was raised, I'm assigned female at birth too, and it's so hard to be in touch with that, because then you're told, as a female person, you're being too emotional, you're being too this, or there's all these things, and then it's like, you're not being strong enough, and with every gender, being fluid, all these things, there's all these strings, and all the bullshit of society is what I'm going to say. But really being in touch with you, it's hard. It's a practice.
It is, and culture says that women are supposed to play hard to get, right? That men are supposed to pursue. That, like, I've read this great article a little while back that was basically why the Star Wars generation, like people who were raised on Star Wars, are so confused about consent. Right? Because, like, Han Solo is like, you want me. No, I don't want you. You want me. No, I really don't want you. Fuck off. No, you want me. He then throws her against a wall, makes out, and then she melts.
Yeah, that's confusing. Yeah, that's...
And, like, this is a woman who has who has killed Jabba the Hutt and is uber power woman, and yet she can get overthrown by a man after he pursues her without consent 3 times, and then she gives in. That's confusing messaging in media.
Yes.
Well, I think if people look to TV and movies and things as a model of how to live their life in any way, shape, or form, is drastically wrong. Especially because.
Yeah. It's true. It is what we do. And even, like, as a slave, like, people laughed at me when I was like, I'm a slave. They're like, you're so outgoing. You're so these things. Like, you can't be a slave. And I'm like, watch me, motherfuckers. I don't care. It's not, like...
Well, I've been of the opinion of a long time. Something somebody told me a long time ago is that when it comes to an MS dynamic, the slave in that dynamic... the better of, I'm not gonna say best or great or whatever, because I've known great slaves and great submissives who have no dominant bone in their body whatsoever. But to me, I like somebody who has that dominant side and can use that dominant side towards what I would want out of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's interesting what people are drawn towards. For some people, they are drawn towards having partners who surrender to them, who are clay that long to be molded. There are other individuals who are looking for a workhorse who will follow through and take their mission out to the world. There are other people who are looking for warriors who will go out and fight in their name. There are other people who are looking for major domos who will run their household for them. And others are looking for property who will be theirs, but at the same time live their life fully, knowing that they are the only person that individual submits to. There are some people who are looking for pets, right? I want something to spoil. You shall be my kitty cat. Right?
Well,
you will be my buddy, and I will name you Sasquatch.
But I also then look at like the R. Kelly situation.
Yeah.
And I defended R. Kelly in that situation because even though personally I would not want to live, that type of a lifestyle.
It seemed very TPE to us, total power exchange.
Yeah.
That the women had agreed, like they had gone on camera and saying, and everyone was saying in the media, anyone that doesn't know, or Lee, if you don't know, the media was saying he coerced these women, blah, 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 and didn't look like that.
Well, partially, yeah, because, he's a famous guy.
So, like we're saying,
he can,
there could
he
be...
was trying...
Yeah.
Right, it's like that's where the layering of it is, but ultimately, these women were consenting, even when the cops came in and gave them the full opportunity to say,
leave.
Here, we can take you right now out this door and bring you back to your family. Do you want that? And they were all uniformly like, no, we're happy here. This is what we want. And the fact that it became a major news story was sad to me. It's like, just leave these people alone to let them live their lives. Even if you don't like it or understand it. There's a lot of people out there living lives that I don't like or understand, but I'm not going to sit here and actively try to stop them either.
And to me, there's a nuanced conversation, and there's layers of the conversation. I just watched a great documentary on Waco, the fire at Waco, Texas, and the whole shit that went down with the sheer number of people that were killed there.
Right.
And the cult that was there, and the line between what is a religion and what is a cult is interesting in American legal standings. It's usually based on the number of people and their political standing. But
that's why Scientology is now called a religion and not a cult.
Exactly, because
Right.
there's enough people and it holds enough political clout. And so, like, they were looking at it, looking back on it, and there was this line. I actually included in my book, in the book that I co-wrote with Melina Williams. We have permission from Isaac Bonowitz's widow, to include EDEF, which is the Advanced Bonowitz Cult Detection Evaluation Frame that used to be used by the government to determine is this a religion or is this a cult. And I use it in the kink community to look at whether your relationships or the group you're joining, is it a cult or is it a healthy relationship? And one of the things that made Waco a cult is that for people to be able to grow higher in the ranks, the women had to have sex with David Koresh.
Right.
Are you required to have sex to gain standing within that group? And there are some kink groups where that's true. You cannot become a dominant unless you have sex with the dominant before you. Is this abuse? Or is this actually how you want to live your life? Is everybody required to dress in a specific way? Is everybody allowed? And there are lines where it's like, are these things hot smut/DS power exchange relationships? Or is it something that you actually want to do? And if we look back at the Koresh situation, there were people that after the fires still are members of that church / cult that are still members and still believe in the faith. And there are other people who have turned around and said, you know what, I didn't realize until everything went down how indoctrinated I was, how much I was putting my children's life at risk, how far gone I was.
Right.
And so the question of consent, there's consent, before, like, while we're thinking about it before it ever happens. There's consent that continues while we're doing the thing.
Right.
And then there's looking about it in reflection, and did I really consent now that I have further information?
You can always opt out of it. If you can't get out of something, that's when, even in slavery, you can say, I'm done serving you, and you can walk away. You can give the collar back. In other things, you know, if you're in this cult and you can't get out of it, you have no job, you have no, you know, there are situations where there's TPE, CNC dynamics, where people can't get away. There are. Yeah.
I mean, even here locally, there's been discussion about one group that the dominant in the dominant master, whatever, in the group, to become part of his group, you basically have to disconnect from your family. You have to change your name. You have to do, you know, this, and this. And I'm sitting here going, okay, you know, from the outside world, yes, that could be seen very much cultish. I mean, even with the R. Kelly thing, that could be seen very much cultish. But I also know that that's how a lot of TPE relationships work. You know, where you come into this TPE and you, to be part of this thing, you have to willingly give up all
Your
of
identity.
this
Yeah.
to be part of this. And it's like, is that then bad? And the answer is, I don't know. Because it's a case-by-case basis. It's where, you know, what, you know...
These things are so abstract.
Well, no, they're not abstract because these are affected people that I know.
Yeah.
And so, because I know a lot of people who have, who refer to their, I know one person specifically that I'm thinking of, who does power exchange dynamics with what she calls the right of last refusal. I have complete control in this relationship. The one right you have is a final refusal that if you walk that door, we're done.
Right.
Right. The thing that challenges me sometimes with some of those power dynamics and some of those is how are the wills set up? If the dominant partner passes away, who does the money go to?
Right.
Who do possessions go to? And I know of folks who a dominant partner has passed away and their biological children have come in and taken everything, and those people have been left with not a penny on them, not even their own clothes on their back.
That's horrible.
Well, that's why when I went to Leather Conference in Phoenix years ago, and one of the things that was being promoted at that point was the concept of having power of attorney and a living will as a standard for a long-term DS or MS relationship, simply because a lot of people in the community, even if they've been in long-term 20-plus year MS and DS relationships, never get married. And for a long time, there was a lot of people where that was just not available. You know, just recently it's become available to everybody, but there's a lot of people, even with it being available, still don't want to do it.
Yeah, we may never, if we end up, you know, we may never get married. I don't know, so.
But it's like having that, it's like, because before Obama, you know, if she has to go into the hospital, you know, the hospital to say, well, you're not family, you can't see her, even though I've been in a long-term relationship with her. And now it's becoming a little bit easier, but still, having a living will and a power of attorney set up makes it so that you don't have to worry about that stuff as much. I mean, there's still, family could fight you if they wanted to legally, but you know, if you have a living will that says no, this person has first priority over me, you know, but it's like that's something that's still, you know, I don't think it's seeped deep into the consciousness of the community at this point. We still are like, oh, it's just all fun and games still.
Well, my question also becomes not just while people are alive and in hospitals, but if you have somebody who has been living in your home and has no work career history for the last 20 years, what happens after you die and they're going to be able to support themselves? So, like my girl and I, we have had the hard conversation of if I pass away, because she has been used for the last 5 years to being mine and having me assist in making all of her decisions and all that stuff.
Right.
Who does she go to if she needs somebody to keep having a firm hand?
Right.
And we've talked with friends about would they be able to be her back, like her stand between, like her middle ground until she gets on her feet. I know other folks that know they're full-time 24/7 dynamics. There is another dominant who is a agreed to take that person upon death.
Right.
Because there are folks who that is their full-time wiring, and if you have set that person up as a dominant partner, you have taken that person on, I consider there to be a degree of responsibility to have the conversation for posthumous planning.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's not responsible as a dominant or as a top to, go on that path with someone and not set those things up. That seems really irresponsible to me. Not.
But it's a collaborative conversation, right? Because if you also know that you're that kind of surrendering partner, if you know that you're the person who, if that person passes away and I don't have my stuff has a giant 10-year hole in it, or even a 2-year hole in today's economic situations.
Right.
Right? If you have that going on, it's okay to ask, ma'am, I've been thinking about it, and, or daddy, I've been thinking about it, and what happens if you ever pass away? And that question goes in the other direction. Right. I know somebody who's, they sent their slave to their boy, I think actually the term that they use, but either way, whatever term they're using, to go become a trained acupuncturist and assisted living person, right? Massage therapist, acupuncturist, and because they have disabilities, and they're most likely going to be the dominant's the one who's most likely going to die first, and already has health issues. But what happens if their boy dies?
Right.
Right.
What's the plan for that person's support? Because sometimes we talk about a dominant person dying, but what happens if your submitting partner dies and they have been? Do you know how to pay your own bills?
Right.
And this is one of the things that's a hard topic, because again, I am the type of person that I identify as a slave, and I have this deep servitude part, but I'm still very much that go-getter type. So I still do a lot of those. He delegates to me, the things and all that. But so I can still do all these things, but some people, that's their path, right? But to me, it's like, it doesn't feel safe for me to not be able to, if something ended, if something happened to him, or in any kind of relationship, that I wouldn't be able to pick myself up and be okay. And that's also part of my past.
Well, I think that's partially the responsibility of the dominant as well, to know how to do all these things for yourself, but also make sure the person, the other person in your life, knows how to do them as well. It's like, I'm not going to tell her to do something that I don't know already how to do. I'm not going to, I think that, it's like, if I know how to do it, I can then help her figure out how to make it be the way that I prefer, versus just go learn how to do it. And I'm sitting here, if something were to happen.
That's some people's style, though.
Right.
That is some people's style.
I don't know if I agree with that, because you know what? Like, I think of it with SM, right? How a flogger hitting my back has no relevance to how a flogger feels hitting your back.
Right.
I know people are like, I must experience this thing on my skin before I do it to another person. If you're not a masochist, you will understand the sensation, but you will not understand the sensation.
Right, and I'm a spiritualist, and he's not. So there's a lot of things that I find meaning in different ways than he does, and, agree to disagree type of thing, but he won't completely get that. I do see what he's saying in a logistical way. I agree with that part of, like, with us, it works best because of my anxiety for him to know how to do something. That if he's asking me to do it, that,
no, I mean, it's like, there's been others in my life that, no, sometimes I'm like, I want you to know how to do this, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's sometimes fine. But just from my experience of doing this for as long as I have, I've learned, especially with somebody like her, with her anxiety and stuff, I say, I want this done. She doesn't necessarily know how to do it. It's just easier for me to just show her how to do it, instead of, sit there and watch her fail constantly. And
I would say for myself, I had to have a wake up to that. Former girl of mine, I assigned her the task that while I am out today, I would like you to do laundry. I consider this to have been a simple task.
You would think.
I lived in an apartment complex at the time. The quarters are there. The soap was out. Everything was in a basket that was for 2 loads, right? There was a whites load and there was a darks load. This should be simple. I get home, and I'm like, oh, thanks, and I continue off the day. And she starts having a meltdown. I mean, not like bad meltdown, like she wasn't crazy, like level of whatever. Like, I'm not trying to say anything bad. She was an amazing girl and submissive, and I am so grateful to have had her. But we had this mismatch because she was like, but I worked so hard on this, and that's all I get out of it. Because she was a words of affirmation person, love style.
I am too, yeah.
And what I found out is that she had in her own house not done her own, like she has a laundry service. She hadn't done laundry in like at least 5 years. She had never lived in an apartment complex because when she's lived in a house where she had a laundry machine. So she didn't know how this all worked. She thought she had to go there and sit there with the laundry the entire time. She had to figure out what temperature things. She had like, anxiety issues. Like there was layers of stuff that what I thought was a simple request that would take, drop it off for one thing, come back in 45 minutes, switch it over, etc. Like I thought this was a simple ask, but I didn't know that until I knew it.
That's what we're saying about experiencing the things too, and especially with who you're with, because this is my first MS relationship. I've been in other power exchange relationships, but navigating my anxiety, I almost feel like it's a separate person. And so navigating with my anxiety in the power exchange is very challenging. It's very challenging. And again, like the way he's tailored his approach with me is different maybe than he has in the past. Just because of, and I do all the things. I can do all the things. Right. I know to do laundry, obviously. But like, there's all the things can be different.
Right.
But I think
that's exactly it.
Right.
It's I think it's one of the things to be aware of is who are you in partnership with? And if you're in a power exchange dynamic with someone, no matter what that looks like, including if it's what you call egalitarian, what does a relationship between equals look like?
Right.
There's a great book that I would love to recommend by Raven Caldera and Joshua Tenpenny. It's available on alfredpress.com. It's got a red and blue cover, and I don't remember the name.
Red and blue cover, guys.
It's a red and blue cover. It's on alfredpress.com. It's also at, lots of other online vendors, but I believe in buying things as close to a publisher as possible because then authors make more money. That also includes if you're listening and you're like, oh, I'll buy one of Lee's books on Amazon. That's a great offer. Thank you so much. Better than that, go support your local brick and mortar bookstores. Keep our local bookstores alive.
Which we always say, go to Wicked Grounds, go to your local place, go,
Please go to your local bookstores. They can order these things. And yes, it costs $1 more, but that dollar goes back to your community rather than a mega corporation.
Right.
Anyway, so back to that book. One of the things that they talk about in the book is about creating collaborative relationships. And it's about power exchange dynamics in that book, but I think it applies to all relationships. The idea that we are building a team. Our team might look like a mayor, a corporal, and a private, right? We might be a military structure of the team that we have. Our team may be a sports team that happens to have a coach. Our team might look like a pair of, stereotypical, Ward and June Cleaver, that kind of thing might be the structure that our team looks like. But the goal is to set our team up for success.
Right, with what you have in your pocket, in your experiences, you as people, individuals, and collaboratively, right?
Exactly, and I always loved the metaphor that if I own a violin, right, I have some choices. Option 1, try to use it as a hammer. Because right now, today, I'm looking for a hammer. Option 2, dip it in steel so that now I have a hammer. Option 3, learn how to play a violin. Option 4, find somebody who loves violins and have them become part of my team. Right? And then I go find a hammer. Or I borrow a hammer.
Right.
And I think that can apply sometimes, too, with our relationships that we're in. You know what? I might not know how to play a hammer very well. Play a hammer. I don't know how to play a hammer. But I might not know how to play a violin, but I can loan my violin out on occasion and sit there and listen to the concerto that is being played before me. And to me, that's a model of looking at having open play relationships where that might be my girl that you're borrowing, but I get to sit there and watch you make her scream for me as the witness.
Well, I think that's one...
Right? That's kind of cool.
Right.
And or I might have you, oh amazing needle play top, teach me. And together I get to go on violin lessons with you. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Well, I think
there's lots of options there.
Right. And I think that, again, there's no one right, style,
No.
but it's like for me...
Except consent. That's the only, that's the right.
Well, I always love the old line, safe, sane, and consensual. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but 1 is necessary.
That's an interesting axiom, yeah, or framework. I'm not concerned. My brain's not pulling up the word to refer to that.
But it's like,
but yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right, but it's like, it would be, it's like, as long as what you're doing, I mean, and again, we can spend years talking about, what, is it actual consent? Is it not actual consent? Is it this? Is it that? Is it? It's like, no.
Removing consent after a scene and all those.
I years ago I did a video that it's starting to rear its ugly head again of this concept of post-scene consent removal. It's like, yeah, you may not have liked the scene. It doesn't mean that they did anything wrong during the scene. And it's like, don't sit there and go, they broke.
I feel like Lee's going to say something about the wrong. I think what Lee's going to, I'm not trying to assume what you're going to say, but what I feel in this situation and where you're saying what probably Lee's going to come from is that there is no wrong. It's not wrong, but sometimes people have reactions to things or things, spark them in a way that they weren't expecting and weren't wanting to consent to, but they consented to the acts themselves. And so it can feel very...
Yeah, the way I look at that is that intent is not needed for harm to occur.
Right.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to look at this thing called consent, and I personally am a fan of learning all of the different metaphors and then hacking something together. So there's the idea of looking at consent as giving consent for a cup of tea, right? That if I go, you say, would you like a cup of tea? And the other person says, no, thank you. You go, but tea is tasty. No, thank you. But I made the tea for you. No, thank you. No, you want the tea. Here, let me make you drink it. I really didn't want the tea. Or there's the, there's the tea metaphor. There's the castle metaphor, where if we're going to talk about building a castle, the first thing we have to figure out is, well, what kind of castle, right? We spend a lot of time figuring out, does it have a moat around it, right? Is it like more of like a, is it like a Turkish castle, or is it like a Russian castle, or are we in like Japan? What kind of castle is this? We spend a lot of time on what kind of castle. And eventually, if we're in a relationship long enough, whether it's a play partner relationship or whether it's like an old friend, right, or a loved one, if we're in that castle long enough, we can start talking about what the decor of the castle is and whether we want tea while sitting in our castle. But I'm right now in love with the one from Planned Parenthood, the one they've been advertising in the last year or so, which is fries. Freely given, revocable, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. And the one that I love in there is informed.
Right.
And sometimes we don't have the information until we have it.
Yeah, like, what's the experience of the person? Because I've had people, like, they make it seem like they have all this experience, and they really don't, or they don't, all these things. And that's what I think you're getting at, that people come back and say, whoa.
You promised me subspace. Instead, I just got hit for an hour.
Right, and it's like... it's like, for me, it's like, I'll never walk into a scene and say, I absolutely guarantee these 5 things will happen. It's like, no, These are the things I'm going to do. These are the things that I want to do. And we had, I believe in the concept. We're actually going to be doing a class at Citadel in a bit.
I'm so excited.
What I'm calling the Big 5, which is conversation, negotiation, consent, safe words, and aftercare. And it's like, if you don't have that conversation, why are you going straight into negotiation? It's like, you need to have that talk about, who am I as a person? Who are you as a person?
How are we connected? And then, okay, these 2 or 3 things, like, oh, okay, you're interested in my vlogging style. Great. Now we can start moving into part 2. Then we need to, make sure that with the consent, you understand everything that's going to happen. You understand this is... here, I can do this, I can't do that. Yes, I can touch your tits. No, I can't touch your tits. Yes, I can do this. No, I can't do that. So on and so on and so on. And it's like, if you don't have, and I see so many people get into these types of scenes where they don't do all of that legwork, and then they have a bad experience in the end and then blame the top.
Yeah.
Or blame the bottom.
What's your risk profile?
Right.
Because you can choose to not do any of those 5.
Right, but you're choosing that.
You're choosing a higher risk factor of shit going sideways and bad.
Right.
Right? And I don't mean bad as a judgment. I mean, like, bad as in physical risk.
Right.
Because I will admit, there have been times that I've been at, like, a gay dance party, and I pull a piece of parachute cord or a piece of rope out of my back pocket, and I see some hot thing across the corner, and I wink at them, and they wink at me, and they dance towards me, and I tie up their hands, and we molest each other. I've done that scene. I don't know their name.
I love it.
Right? Like, but has it been a scene I've had? Yeah.
But
how many risks did I just take?
Right.
Right.
But I think
Right?
I think that there's like a sliding scale when it comes to this. It's like the people who spend massive amounts of time, weeks discussing scenes and getting down to details, and everything is perfectly laid out.
But then you get triggered in the middle of the scene.
No. But as I'm saying, but it's like, you spend all this time working it out. Is that scene going to be as hot as I just happen to meet somebody, we don't even really know each other's names, and we go play? And it's like, there's this spectrum of, none of these are right, but all of them can lead to, like, over planning could lead to it not being any fun. Because at that point, you're just going through the routine. Versus this, you might wind up going out with somebody, and because you didn't have that conversation, you now have an STI.
Right.
And it's like, but there's all of this gray area in between of what works, what doesn't work. And it's just trying to do it in the best safe way possible.
Right.
But it's like, if you have a good foundation, it's like, it's like when it's like, if you're going to go and do these things, know how to do the basics before you go and start trying to do the advanced stuff.
Right. And I would also say know which sub-communities you're in and what quote language people are speaking. And I'm not just talking about English being based in the United States. With English being my first language. I'm also talking about, if I'm in the swinger community, I have to acknowledge that it is more common to have nonverbal communication and negotiation than there is to have verbal negotiation and communication. If somebody puts their knee up against me and pushes into me a little bit, and I push back, I have now given permission, potentially, for them to put their hand on my thigh.
Right.
And if I put my hand back on their thigh, I have now given permission for them to put their hand on my crotch.
Right, which is, I've been in swinger situations, and it was not comfortable for me. I was like, whoa, the culture.
Right. If you don't know that that's the negotiation style, it's like you get that hand on your thigh and you just freeze. For some folks.
Right.
Right? Or if I'm in a bathhouse and I catch somebody's eye and I look away and I look back and they're still looking, they have now given permission for me to approach. If I approach, they at any point can walk away. Right? They can revoke that consent. But if I walk up to them, they can reach over and touch my blank. Right? And if they grab my cock and I'm not interested in that area, I can move my hand to my ass to give a new piece of information. Right? I am not interested in using this with you. I would like to use this with you. Right? Like, we have layers of nonverbal communication and negotiation by the actions that we do.
Right.
And then at any point, I can walk away from this.
Right,
and my risk factors are just what you were talking about. We could go away with an STI. We could go away with a misunderstanding of what that meant. Maybe when I put my hand on your ass, you thought I wanted to be fisted, and I thought I wanted to be fucked with your cock.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think
yeah, I know, that's why it's dangerous.
Right, but it
can be hot, but it can be dangerous. Woo!
But I think there's unfortunately a lot of people who are jumping into the community who don't understand the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you ask somebody who understands the basics and sometimes some of the more advanced stuff, we're speaking a language that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's like, even if I'm being very, very deep, true, and honest with them, I could be speaking Klingon, and it'd make just as much sense.
Like Lee was saying earlier, there's a difference in, like, being experienced and not in, like, the language. Like you were mentioning, that it can be like, oh, you consented to this, but you didn't really fully understand.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have information. You're not informed. The reason I wanted to bring up those other formats, though, is that there are people who come into the kink community from the swinger community.
Yes.
From the bathhouse community. And to have an awareness that when we're talking about negotiation, this has a lot of different forms, and that in the kink community, verbal negotiation is more common. Whether that is in person at a coffee shop, like Wicked Grounds if you're in San Francisco, now that it's back open. Yay! Or whether it's on email, with an awareness that sometimes people forget stuff, right? Somebody might forget if you did this piece of negotiation 7 months ago, and finally you're hooking up, they might have forgotten that you're allergic to beeswax or whatever, right? I don't know why you would be using beeswax in a scene, but like whatever. You probably shouldn't.
I trust me, as somebody who loves playing with wax, I've had plenty of discussions. Well, why don't you use beeswax? Because the melting point is so incredibly high that it would wind up burning your skin.
Yeah,
but I like beeswax. Yeah.
You can tell. But like people might forget little details, and so being willing and able to speak up or own the fact that if you didn't, there's like shit goes sideways. People mess up.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't hold all of us to a higher standard and say, I didn't consent to that. And start putting it back on a path of how we figure out how we move forward from here. I've had times where I have said, by the way, like I've negotiated ahead of time, by the way, my shoulder hurts right now, please don't tie me up in that way. And people have tied me up in that way. And I've had to then speak up in some way, shape, or form and say, remember how I said not to do that? That didn't mean my scene was over. And how I often say it, in all honesty, if I want to keep the scene going, is even just changing the tone of my voice from, you fucktard, why'd you tie up my right shoulder, to like, could you move my shoulder? Because as you'll remember, I'm having challenges with it.
Right. Oh, I just wanted to...
Some of my pops are delicate little snowflakes.
Yeah.
Right, totally. I wanted to see if we could get any questions from, because we're getting...
We've been talking for quite a while.
Yeah, we're getting close to that, the end of that time that you said you had, so I wanted to check in real quick. Anybody that's watching the live show have any questions for Lee? Anything you want to expand on what we've discussed a lot, and this has been awesome. Thank you.
Had an adventure.
Yes, like I said, choose your own adventure, and you've chosen to go on an adventure with us, so I feel so, honored by that.
So, before, let's, why don't we go ahead and have you promote all your stuff and get that
going.
Get that going, because we want to wrap up here pretty soon. And after we're done, we'll shut everything off and then talk for a couple more seconds and then go from there. So,
Love it.
All right. So why don't you go ahead and get some plugs in there.
So people can find my work over at passionandsoul.com. Though if you type in Lee Harrington on the internet, you either find me or a lovely woman who named Lee Harrington, who wrote Rex in the City, a complete dog walking guide, who is not, but she's gotten my mail before.
Which must have been very interesting.
Yeah, she's lovely. I've written a lot of different books out there, from how to do rope bondage to exploring the sacredness of kink, to looking at how you want to explore the kink community that's playing well with others. But sacred kink, shibari you can use. I have a book on age play, so feel free to check out all those. I've been podcasting since 2011, and I've been blogging online since 1998, and you can find all of that information, free essays and whatnot, up on my website, as well as my travel and tour schedule. I've got an anthology coming out that I co-edited with Ty Phoenix Castillan that's called Queer Magic, Power Beyond Boundaries. So keep an ear out for my upcoming tours. I'm going to be in D.C. in a week and a half, but for the book tour, I'll be in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, and Ventura, California in April. And then in May through June, I'm going to be predominantly in Maryland at Ramblewood at a number of different events. But I have all that up on my website. And for folks who are looking to plan ahead for November, I'm also going to be at the Kink Social Cruise, which is going to be leaving out of Miami and traveling around to Honduras, Mexico, and throughout the Caribbean, where we're going to be having all kinds of fun classes and whatnot while out on a cruise.
Awesome.
So those are some of my upcoming things. Feel free to stalk me online if you want to go to my website. At the very bottom it says Stalking Made Easy. So you can find all of my FetLife profiles, my Facebook information, Twitter, Instagram, etc. I'm pretty easy to find.
Great. So we didn't get any questions.
Yeah, nobody else had last time
very
to ask a question. Yeah, there's people watching, but they're very quiet.
But definitely would love to hook up with you when you could come down to the Bay Area. Maybe we can do something like this again, but actually do it in person.
Yeah.
I love it.
So that sounds awesome. So I'm going to wrap things up on the live stream and on that, and then
we'll be with you in 1 second. We're just going to...
All right. So
thank everybody for joining us.
All right. So everybody on the live stream.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye.
Okay.